Hi everyone, welcome to our Infinite STEM Q&A session today with Miss Vinia Wang. She's a PhD student at Johns Hopkins University, and today she'll be telling us a little bit more about her experiences and giving us hopefully some insightful tips to help us out. So I guess we can start with the questions right away, or actually if you want, you can introduce yourself to everybody and then we'll start asking the questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you guys for having me on. Just a quick introduction. I'm a PhD student at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. I am studying, or my program is called the Cellular Molecular Medicine Program. I'm looking at really the molecular mechanisms with a translational focus. So kind of bridging basic biology with therapeutics. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one of the main questions that me and Richard had for you is that John Hopkins is like every biology student's dream school pretty much. It has top-notch facilities, great teachers, and it's usually at the top of every school list rankings for bio. So can you share an average day in the life of a PhD student at Johns Hopkins University? Like what is it like, and is there a lot of work pressure, and how exactly are your days looking like?
Yeah, um, so a PhD program basically that for most PhD programs, you have classes your first and your second year. So it was definitely very course load heavy my first year. During my first year, I had courses in the morning and then I had research in the afternoon. My program recommended 3 to 4 rotations per student. So a rotation is basically your tryout of a lab that you're interested in. And at the end of the school year, you pick a lab out of the 3 or 4 that you rotated in. So rotation lasts, I think for us, it lasted around 2 months. And so during the 2 months, you really get a feel of, if you get along with the people in the lab, if you like the research, if this is what you want to do, et cetera, et cetera. After the end of your first year, then you pick a rotation lab and you can start your thesis work. So you'll talk to your PI or the principal investigator of the lab and decide on a research project that interests you. And then you can kind of, start doing preliminary experiments, et cetera, reading a lot of literature into your field. And then at least for CMM, cellular molecular medicine, which is the program I'm in at the end of this calendar year, in the middle of your second year, you take your qualifying or your candidacies. And this is, if you pass, this is when you transition from a graduate student or a PhD student to a PhD candidate. Then after that, you can still take electives. So you can take, whatever classes that you want that may be beneficial to your research, but the majority of your work now will be in lab. So by your 3rd, 4th, and 5th year, you will be spending most of your time in lab working on your thesis project. And so graduation's kind of different. So in med school, every year is very organized and you know exactly what you're getting into. In research, you'll hear about, people who are able to graduate in 4 years, most people graduate in 5, some graduate in 6, etc. And this is because when you're progressing through your research, you'll actually have a thesis committee, which is a committee of faculty that will evaluate you on how much you did. And basically, if you have done enough to warrant a PhD, then you can graduate. And so this is why some people take extraordinarily long amounts of time for their PhD. It's not really their fault, but if your research doesn't work or if things aren't working, then you aren't making progress, even though you're still working just as hard. And so there's definitely that pressure and that unknown there. Let me know if I missed anything or if you guys have any questions.
My gosh, that was pretty interesting. And I like a quick follow-up on the research rotation you talked about. So you said you had to like kind of jump into like labs with high-level professors. So was it
Mhm.
like hard to catch up at first? And how exactly do you make the transition smooth, especially going to such a
Yeah,
high level?
that's a really good question. Okay, so our program has these seminars at the beginning of the year where interested faculty that have openings for grad students or are willing to take grad students most of the time will talk a little bit, literally like 15 minutes about their research. Obviously, what you find super interesting, someone else might not find interesting, and vice versa. So I sat through around a month or a month and a half of those, and they're definitely faculty where you're like, wow, this is exactly what I want to do, or I have no idea what they're doing, but I want to do this. So I had people in my cohort who decided to join computational labs because they really wanted to learn, um, RNA sequencing, all of these really powerful things. And so even though they didn't know if that's something they were interested in, rotation is the best way to learn these things and realize if it's for you or not. Um, Another thing is for example, I rotated in a lab that did organoid work, which is basically like instead of culturing cells 2D, you can culture them in a way that allows them to form like organoids. And so that gives you, it's a little more translational because it's a 3D structure, and that's something that I really wanted to learn. And so I rotated in a lab that did that. And so there's a lot of reasons why you can pick, certain labs that you want. But most of the time, if you're interested, then what you would do is you would go look up the PI, look at their recent papers, read. I mean, some of these papers are very dense, but definitely at least read the abstract and the discussion. And so you can ask them questions. And most of the time, when you meet with the PI, you kind of get a sense of their personality and your personality. And then you can ask, are you open to taking rotation students? And another thing is ask about their funding. So a lot of very popular labs will have a lot of students who want to rotate, and they'll most of the time the PI will tell you in advance, hey, we have 6 people rotating the whole year. We can only, it's definitely more unsafe than where I went to school in California, but it's pretty nice actually. You just have to be really wary about where you live, and whenever it's dark, I never walk alone outside, versus in La Jolla or San Diego, I used to, during finals week and I'm like really stressed, I could just take a walk at midnight and it doesn't matter. So I guess it's like you have to weigh your options. I could have stayed in California, but I really like this program, and so I don't regret coming here, but I will probably move back after I get my degree. But definitely wherever you guys go, definitely fly out and check it out like before you commit, because the location is really important. Don't just go by the name. Like I really like San Diego. I like the beach. I was able to take surfing classes. Like think about where you want to live for the defining, for the next 4 or 5 years of your life, basically. Okay.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry, I had an internet issue, so I think that's what ended the meeting, but I'm back. So I actually had a question regarding like your actual research topics itself. So your profile said that you're doing work in CRISPR. Uh,
My LinkedIn profile is really old. Sorry, I should have updated it. I was working in CRISPR when I was working at UCSD, but now I'm actually not working in CRISPR, but ask away.
oh, okay, yeah, sure. So I was just kind of wondering, like, since CRISPR is a very interesting field, and like just the whole idea of like being able to edit genes and like clone genes is like a really promising idea. I wanted to get your thoughts on where you think CRISPR or like gene editing would be like maybe 10 to 20 years from now,
Yeah, that's a
where it's
really
at.
good question. I really do think, I think there is there are some clinical trials using CRISPR as therapeutics, like not just gene editing in vitro, but actually using it for, I think there was a really famous one about sickle cell anemia, about being able to knock in that proper gene that makes the correct protein. And so I think that people are looking more towards using CRISPR to try to correct for, mutations or diseases that have a very well-known genetic basis. Because if you think about it, like, why make a drug that will antagonize or inhibit your mutant protein if you could just fix what's causing it? However, that being said, there's a lot of, you're genetically editing permanently. And so there's a lot of ethical concerns and also a lot of concerns with off-target effects, because you've done a lot of testing with that drug. So you know that it shouldn't interact with other things. But if you put a protein that's able to, in theory, cleave your DNA, it's your I think the risks are quite enormous. And so I think people are definitely working on that, to try to see if we can move it into the more translational field. Oh my gosh. Am I planning? Can I read these questions and answer them?
Yeah, sure, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Are you planning on med school after PhD? If so, why do PhD and MD? If not, are you thinking about going to academia or going into industry? So I'm not planning to go to med school after my PhD. If you do want to, if you're super into a PhD program and going to med school, I know people at the MD PhD program at Hopkins, so definitely look into that. It's 2 years of med school, then you do your PhD, and then the last 2 years of med school after. I just wasn't really that interested in the clinical side of it. A lot of people are really into healthcare and interacting with patients, et cetera, et cetera. That just wasn't something that interested me so much. I really enjoy like learning about the molecular basis of things. In my classes, I love genetics. I wasn't a big fan of physiology. It's like just what your interests lie in. I probably won't go into academia because it just requires a lot of work and effort. And I know it's probably too soon for you guys, but definitely when you're in undergrad, you'll start to prioritize things in life. And so if you want to do academia, then, the people I know who are postdocs are just like some of the hardest workers. But I really want to, I really want to have a family after I graduate. And while there are female PIs, it's just incredibly difficult. And I also don't want the stress of knowing that I have to publish papers or my lab funding will dry out, and then I just don't want that pressure. And so I'm happy going into industry. The only thing with industry is like you're not picking the projects you're working on, right? People are giving you the projects you're working on. And sometimes that means that you're not really discovering or taking the most interesting path because you're taking what makes the most sense into getting this drug into market. But for me, that doesn't really matter because I think it's still cool science, and I'm not that concerned about like keeping my project, but it's just all about where your interests lie. I didn't do a master's. I did my bachelor's straight into a PhD. And one reason is because for a PhD program, they actually pay you. So you're not paying tuition. And I just I really didn't want to take out loans to do a master's if I knew I was going to go and do a PhD. And actually something else is, let's say I pass my qualifying. So I pass my qualifying exam, and then I decide like, I don't want to continue. This is too intense for me. I want to leave. Then technically by passing your qualifying, you have gotten a master's. And so if I leave after the qualifying before my PhD, I would leave with a master's. And so if you're going into a PhD program, I wouldn't recommend taking part in a master's in the same field unless it's paid for. if it's a different field, then obviously like go for it. You could definitely, if you get a master's in data science, for example, then you can definitely use that for your PhD. Someone else asked, okay. Yes, actually, there are undergraduates that are doing summer internships at Hopkins and at my lab, but I don't know through what portal or avenue they've gotten here. I didn't even know that was something that they could do, but there are, for high schoolers, it's definitely difficult because you're under 18, but for undergraduates, I think there are programs, you just have to look for them, like Johns Hopkins School of Medicine undergraduate opportunities. For high schoolers, I actually saw that there is a really interesting summer program at USC. I think it's called like USC summer classes something. But you just have to look around. But definitely for undergraduate students, there are opportunities.
Okay, so we had another question. So talking about just like research opportunities in general, since there's a lot of high schoolers who are especially interested in getting this sort of experience. And we also looked at your LinkedIn profile and noticed that you did wet lab research as a high schooler at the Rosetta Institute, and you did like tissue culture work. So can you talk a little bit about like high school research experiences and how these helped you when you were applying to undergrad school, and any opportunities or tips you have for other high schoolers?
Yeah, so for me, I actually reached out. So I did Rosetta, which is a summer program, and the director of Rosetta, Dr. Ryan Hoser, actually just, because I think his phone number was in an area code I recognize, I reached out to him after and I was like, hey, I'm really interested in research. I don't really know anything, but I'm a hard worker and I'm eager to learn. And so he took me on and he taught me, the basics, which really helped me get a research opportunities in undergrad. But honestly, in high school, the high schoolers I know, so there's some high schoolers that are rotating in my lab or doing summer work, and I actually asked them how they got it, and it's because they personally knew the PI. And I know that's kind of a bad answer, but I just think in high school, it's really hard to have official programs. And so I really would just cold email PIs that you're interested in. So you can go to, the directory of whatever institution that you're the closest to, and I would first see if they're taking undergraduates. If they are taking undergraduates, then they're more likely to take high schoolers, and then be like, I'm really, really interested. I read your, just say like, I read the abstract to your papers, and like email them and ask, if they're open to talking about it. And even though there's not a lot of PIs that would say yes, I do know, from my interactions with all of the faculty at Hopkins and at UCSD, that there are definitely some who they were just like you and when they were in high school, and so they want to make it more open. It just requires a lot of work and effort on your part, and that's the only problem. Well, it's like so someone said like, is there any way you can connect me to the undergrad research opportunities? I personally like don't know any, because I didn't go to Hopkins as an undergrad, so I'm not aware of that system. If you ask me about like UCSD, for example, so this person is a student at UC Davis. I think, isn't there a med school at UC Davis? I would just email faculty at UC Davis. I know at UCSD there's like Handshake, which labs will post for openings for undergraduates, but I would really, it depends on where you want to go. And just if you want to go to a certain institution or if you want to work in a particular field, honestly, like I think the best bet is to email. Oh, also hot tip, email PIs in the morning, because a lot of PIs have so many emails, they get buried. They won't even respond to like the grad students or the postdocs. So email them, or like schedule your email to be sent at 7 a.m. their time. And that will make it so that they will see your email.
All right. I actually had one more question. It's like kind of, yeah. So basically what I was wondering is that many individuals like considering careers in like biology or med are kind of hesitant to follow through with it due to like the high levels of commitment and everything. So I was just wondering like, how do you stay focused despite all the work or despite all the pressure that's like put on you when you're studying this topic?
Um, that's a really good question. I think for me, when I met with my PI, I specifically asked her, you know, what are your expectations? Because there are PIs here who, or PIs everywhere, who expect you to work on Saturdays, expect you to stay until 7 p.m. And I just did not want to do that, because my friend, who I won't tell you the institution she's at, but she's at a really good institution. Her PI makes people stay, you know, 10 to 12 hours every day, and they only have Sundays off. And now she is a third year and she doesn't want to go into research. She doesn't want to touch research after she graduates. And so she's really burnt out. And that's just a lot of people, a lot of grad students end up being really burnt out, and they then decide, when I graduate, I'm not going to do this anymore with my life. And so I'm still struggling with the idea of like work-life balance, but I know that as long as I like have something non-work related to look forward to, then I can hopefully be better at balancing, you know, my career and everything else. But it is really hard because you have peers who are just like work, work, work all the time, and you kind of feel like, I could be working harder, I could be putting in more hours, I know I'm capable of it, but being like, no, like I'm going to go, you know, walk around the lake, or I'm going to go to the beach, or I'm going to go eat out with my friends and not feel guilty about it. I think a that's a way for me that has really helped with like being motivated still. Also definitely like studying. I mean, I don't really study with other people, I like studying by myself, but I'll get like lunch or coffee with a friend, and they are also going through the same thing. And so by just ranting about that, it really helps. And then also I try to exercise, because that just like, you know, it's like you can't be on your phone, you can't be on the computer, you're like taking your mind off it. So, you know, we'll see how it goes, because I've just finished my first year, which is the easiest year, but hopefully I still want to do research when I graduate.
Yeah, hopefully it gets better, or it gets a little bit easier. Yeah,
Um,
sorry we're jumping around a lot, but we had like a question too, just generally. So do you think you
yeah,
could describe your educational journey, like say starting from high school?
yeah,
And
yeah,
like I know you've already talked about this a lot, but just the application processes you took for like undergrad and grad school, and how
yeah,
exactly you dealt with them.
yeah, of course. Someone also asked me a question. I'll answer that first. Any advice for reaching out and cold emailing professors or PIs? What should we write? Here I will send you a copy of my email, what I did when I was cold emailing professors, but it might not be that helpful. But I'll send it to you anyway, so that you could, I don't know, put in the caption of that I don't know, so you'll have it. Um, um, okay, my educational journey. Oh, but basically just like write, you know, you don't have a lot of research experience, but you're not afraid to ask questions. You are dedicated, and you will like basically be a hard worker. And then just be honest, you know, just be like, I don't really know what, enter specific niche that whatever research lab does. but I am interested in maybe pursuing research as a career, and I want to, and specifically really interested in learning these things. If possible, do you think that we could have like a quick call, or just be like, do you think that I would be able to shadow, or like, do you think that you would be open to taking, you know, high schoolers or something? But yeah, I'll send you what I sent. It would be what I sent in undergrad. So that's like a little bit different because, you know, I'm over 18. So institutionally, like the legal logistics are better. Okay. And then educational journey. So I grew up in San Jose. Um, my parents were immigrants, which I guess like a lot of us, probably maybe all of us, had immigrant parents. So you know, they work really, really hard and to provide us with the opportunities of moving upwards in life. And so that really, my parents were both engineers, but they, you know, they wanted me to be doctors, but because of that, you know, they let me go to all these biology camps in high school, and they let me, you know, pursue what I was interested in. And that was really I'm really grateful for that, because actually I realized like a lot of parents don't do that. I was really interested in biology um, because I liked the idea when I learned that, you know, people have different genetics. I was actually really interested in epigenetics in high school, because in biology classes, at least when I was in high school, they were just taught like, oh yeah, your genes, genotype equals phenotype. And when I learned that environmental conditions can actually change how your DNA is transcribed, that was just like was mind blowing to me. And so like, you know, when you need to search up something, just like a biology term, but then it takes you to Wikipedia and it's just like, I have no idea what any of this is. I just realized like I need to learn more about this because it's just so out of my element. Like, even though you learn these things and it kind of makes sense, it's hard to see the bigger picture. And so I thought if I pursued biology, then I would, after a while, things might, you know, click into place. And so I went to the University of California, San Diego, where I majored in biochemistry and cell biology. And I really liked chemistry actually. And I really liked my biology classes. I think one of the reasons why I decided to pursue a PhD was because I realized like I truly enjoy learning about these mechanisms, and I really enjoy learning about all the experiments that people in the past have done to get us to what we know and what we believe about biology, and also the fact that we're discovering new things every single day. And when you are taking your lower div and your upper div biology classes, there are a proportion that are going to be really into pre-med and medicine. And I just thought that like, because I'm so interested in the content, probably going to get my PhD is more fit for me than going into medicine, because in medicine, while you have to understand everything, obviously you're not discovering. I mean, you can get an MD and then go into research, but most of the times you're like applying it and being super practical and useful, which is obviously really great. But I was like, I really want to like be part of the discoveries and like maybe discover something that, you know, even though it might not be something that like most people care about, some people might care about, and then that thing will be built on, and then maybe it could be useful somewhere in the future. So after I graduated, I worked as like just a lab tech in the lab that I was doing research in as an undergraduate for half a year before I came to Hopkins for my PhD. And then, yeah. How did you know going for a PhD was right for you? I heard academia is in a rough spot right now. A lot of people are going straight into industry instead of a higher degree. Yeah, so a lot of people are going to industry. For me, while I interned in industry, so I know exactly how nice it is. It's like not, it's like you have a purpose and you feel like you're making a difference because everything you do, like for me, by screening compounds for toxicity, it's like, okay, and I know that this compound isn't toxic in these cells, so now it can move on to the next portion of the pipeline, while like these cells that are toxic, it's not going to become a drug. So you feel like every single thing you do is worthwhile and meaningful. Versus in academia, if you're trying to discover something, it doesn't matter if it took one experiment to discover it, or if it took 100 experiments that discovered it, right? It doesn't matter unless you actually discover the thing that you're looking for. And industry pays a lot better than academia, obviously, and you have that work-life balance. But the thing is, after I finished undergrad, I realized like, yeah, I can do all of these techniques and I understand the point of the experiments. But the problem is like, I don't know what questions to ask. And a PhD is a training program so that when you come out of it, you know what questions to ask, basically. I don't know if you've ever read like a paper and it's like they talk about like figure A, they talk about this thing, and then they're like, next, we looked at blah, blah, blah. I'm like, how did you go from the first section to the second section? Like, I don't follow your train of thought. And so when I was talking to my professors, they were saying like, after you get your PhD, then you'll know exactly what questions to ask. Another thing is if you don't get your PhD in before you go into industry, then a lot of times you hit like a glass ceiling because in the end you just have a bachelor's. And so even though you might be capable of leading your own project, you just don't have that educational knowledge. It's kind of like getting a job right after high school versus getting a job after undergraduate, especially because biology is such a huge field. There's just like so much more to learn. And I think that's why you have to do the extra how many years so that you can really be like a project leader or a senior scientist or, all of these things in industry.
Yeah, it
But yeah.
definitely looks like a pretty complicated process for sure. Okay, so I think we're just about wrapping up on time. We don't want to hold you for too long because we know you're probably really busy with everything. But do you have any final like piece of advice for the people watching and the high schoolers just to help them in the future? Anything you want to say?
I would say like I was kind of shy in high school, so I would really hate for my advice to be like cold emailing people. Sometimes like you just got to do it. And like for me, because I was there and in high school, I really didn't, everyone I knew that was older than me were engineers. So there weren't doctors or biomedical researchers. I'm trying to make it so like I'm always accessible. So if you email me, I will answer your questions. Don't feel, like if I ignore you, it's because I just read the email on my phone and then I was like, oh, I'll reply later. And then I forget to reply. And I think a lot of people are like that. Obviously, you're going to meet some people who just straight up ignore you, which kind of sucks. But I think for the most part, like if like your brother's friend's cousin is in med school or something, like don't be afraid to reach out and talk to them. Because I realize now that there's a lot of resources, but you really have to work to get those opportunities. If they're not open, they're not just going to like fall in your lap, but they're a lot easier than you might think it would be to get them. Yeah, so just like don't be afraid to reach out. Also, if you don't want to do biology, then don't do biology. Like, my parents were like, yeah, be a doctor or an engineer, right? Like, but there are tons of people who are really, really successful and like doing things that they love, and that's not what our parents probably wanted us to do. So like, don't do it unless you're interested in it. And then also in college, take a lot of electives, try to see if there are other things that interest you, even if it doesn't have anything to do with what you want to do. My friend who's at Cambridge right now, she's doing Drosophila research or immunology, but in Drosophila, and she looks at flies. I mean, I would not do that, but she thinks they're cute, whatever. But she double majored in art history because she also really liked art, and that didn't like make it harder for her to get into grad school, but it just gave her something else to look forward to that's like a little different than just focusing on one field.
Hey, gosh, that's some great words of advice. Thank you everyone so much for attending. And if you're from YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And thank you, Ms. Vania Wang, especially. It was really nice learning and getting firsthand experience from a PhD student and getting some tips about this field. So thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you all in our next Infinite STEM workshop.
Thanks for having me.